Good morning, everybody. Or if you're on the East Coast in the United States, guess it's still good morning, but a little later in the morning. Or if you're in Europe or Asia, good afternoon or good evening. I'm Brian Fobi. I'm the CEO of Gurufi, and today I'm going to talk to you about 5 mistakes to avoid in your MBA personal statement. Um, I know a lot of you guys have questions about how to write an effective personal statement, and we've done some previous videos that you can also find on GMAT Club's YouTube channel. And our focus today is going to be a little bit different than some of our previous ones, where you kind of take like a positive ground up approach, like here's how to do it. Today we're going to be looking at it from the other side of like some pitfalls to avoid, some landmines to avoid, to make sure that your personal statement is really compelling and effective. Next. So, as I said, I'm Brian Fobi. I'm the CEO of Gurufi. I'm a Yale PhD. I used to teach writing at Harvard. I've worked in administration and admissions at Yale University. Um, and the last year has been really great for Gurufi clients. Our clients have gone into Harvard Business School, Wharton, INSEAD, Oxford, Syed, Stern, on and on and on. Basically, the top schools. And so far, it's been a really great admission season for us, and we've already started to hear some really great things from clients. And we're really excited to work with you guys if it turns out that any of you would like to come to us for assistance with your personal statements. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the meat of things today. Next. All right, like we can come back to this later. This is, like I said, we're more than just a glorified spell check at Gurufi. We really make sure that we dig into the flow, content shortcomings, real heavy focus on storytelling and making sure that you present yourself in a really effective and compelling way. Next. All right. Like I said, let's jump into things. 5 things to avoid when you're writing your business school personal statement. Next. All right. So here's a place to start as a way to think about this process. Even if you are a very effective and comfortable writer, you write a lot for work. I've even worked with people who have PhDs in English literature. There was a woman who had a PhD in English literature from Stanford who was applying to business school, who came to us, and I was thinking, why in the world would you need help with writing? And the reason is that writing a personal statement is very different than just about any other type of writing that you'll do. And in a way, it's different than how you act, and how you comport yourself and how you present yourself in the real world. And I always say, healthy people don't boast about themselves. And it's certainly the case that you don't want your personal statement to come across as a boast. But what you do want to do is present the best, most compelling, most interesting version of yourself. And that can be really hard to do. One of the things that's certainly true is that a lot of people, even if you live very interesting lives, that's the life that you live every day. It's the only life that you know. And so it's hard to know what's interesting about yourself. So it can be really difficult to see yourself from outside yourself, which is a lot of times what it takes in order to write a really great personal statement. You've got to be able to think, what is it about my journey, about where I am, about what I want to do and become that's different? Okay. And then lastly, there's a lot of pressure that you can feel about this process because it's so high stakes. And it's the first and sometimes only opportunity that an admissions committee can have to learn about you from your point of view. This is different than a letter of recommendation. This is different than a CV. This is you assertively saying, this is what I want to do. This is why I'm interesting and compelling. Next. All right. So point number 1, right? Don't be boring. Super easy for me to say. But it's a mindset and an approach that's really useful to start with, right? Next. So what do I mean by this? The best and most effective way to not be boring is to tell a story. All right. There's a ton of really fascinating research that talks about how people process stories differently. Where our brains, in the same way that our brains are designed to recognize faces, how we structure the world has a lot to do with um, how we tell a story, how we remember a story. I'm one of those people, you might be a person like this as well, who I'm really bad at remembering names, but I can remember 10 or 12 things about you based on a conversation we've had, especially if you tell a really compelling story. And people are designed to care about stories. We're interested in stories. We love a good story. One of the best things that you can be in life is to be a compelling and interesting storyteller. So if you don't want to be boring, tell a story. All right. The first point that I would say to that is that when you have a prompt, all right, so a very common prompt, for example, is, what are your short term and long term goals? All right. A very simple way that you can avoid falling into the robotic approach where you say, my short term goal is X, my long term goal is Y, is don't open your essay that way. All right. For whatever reason, a lot of people write these essays and they feel like almost like it's a primary school essay where someone says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the first sentence you write is, when I grow up, I want to be an architect or something. Don't do that. All right. A small trick here is to directly answer the question at the end of the opening paragraph and not right away. All right. And what this does is it makes sure that you still do directly answer the question, which is important, but you frame that answer within the context of a story that builds up to the answer. And therefore, it provides a sense of context for what it is that you're trying to say. All right. So, what does that look like concretely? Next. All right. So here's two examples. All right. So the question is, what's your long term career aspiration, right? Or some version of that. And so you don't want to open the essay with the sentence, my long term goal is to found an NGO that works with communities in sub-Saharan Africa to provide inexpensive internet access. All right. This is a great story that's told in a really boring way. It doesn't give me a sense of why. It doesn't make me really care about it right away. It's not very interesting and exciting, and it's not really very personalized. Okay, but if you have the same basic approach, except what you do is you stick that kind of direct answer at the end of the opening paragraph, it's a little bit different. All right, it hits different. It leads the reader to a point so that by the time you're actually answering the question, they understand why. And they're like, okay, this is a really interesting and good idea. And I understand where the writer is going with this and why this is something that's important to him. So the different version is, say, um, for months, my team at AfricEd had collaborated with education experts to build a robust and engaging curriculum that would allow children in remote areas of Senegal to receive high quality interactive education. But as Dexter, our contact in Dakar, led us through the slums of the outer city, it became clear that EdTech couldn't have the impact we hoped without infrastructure upon which to build it. On that day, I began thinking deeply about this problem. Thus, and now you're actually answering the question, my long term goal is to found an NGO, da 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 da, right? So you framed it and it's clear why this is your goal. Um, it's clear that this is rooted in real experiences and it's not just a pipe dream that's unconnected and disconnected from who you are and what you've experienced. All right, the reader will experience this suggestion a little bit differently because you framed it, and it also has the benefit of not opening with the words that literally hundreds of other applicants will write, which is my long-term goal is done. All right, if you read that over and over and over again as someone who reads essays, that will turn you off and it will bore you right away, and that's not the effect that you want to have on your reader. Next. All right. uh, Number two, align your past, present, and future. Next. All right. So here's what I mean by this. Um, when you write your essay, or you're planning it or you're outlining it, the reader should get the sense that they are encountering one person and not multiple people. Here's what I mean. If you talk about your past, right, what you have done, your present, what you are doing, and your future, what you hope to do, that should feel like a straight line. All right. I should feel like I'm talking about the same person. All right. And even if individually, past, present, and future, like how you talk about those, are individually compelling, if they don't really stick together, it will feel incoherent and weird. So, for example, you say, okay, my past, what I did in the past. I worked on supply chain issues at PepsiCo. All right, that's my past. My present is I'm currently working at an ed tech company. All right, and my future is that I want to become a consultant working in agriculture. All right, those are three things that individually are interesting and good, but they don't really make sense unless you do the additional work of explaining how these three things are connected. It will feel like your past self is one person, your current self is one person, and who you are in the future is another person. That's not to say that that applicant can't be compelling, but what they've got to do is say, okay, what are the three things that in a straight line connect these three issues, these three experiences, these three accomplishments, these three visions of who you are in the world? And so if you do that and you think specifically about how are my past, present, and future connected? How does my past inform what I do now? How does my past inform what I want to do in the future? How does my present inform what I want to do in the future? Then that story will start to make sense. And it will feel like I'm actually talking to one person who's on a journey and not someone who's sort of randomly hopping between different ideas. And so a way that you can solve this challenge is that as you outline your essay, think about these three questions, which is it's actually six questions, but three kind of groups of questions. First, who were you and what did you do? Who are you now and what are you doing? And third, who do you aspire to become and what will you be doing? And then with each of these, think about what the connection is. What's the connection, either in terms of the kind of work that you do, the type of challenge that you want to take on, between past and present and future. Now, sometimes what the connection will be that it will be moving beyond something, or you'll feel sort of frustrated or constrained within something. So you say, I used to do this, but I realized that the only part of the job that I liked was dealing with clients, and so I wanted to work in a client-facing role. Okay, so it's not that you have to stay within the same field, but you do need to make sure that your explanation for past, present, and future all aligns in a way that's really clear and coherent to the reader. Next. And then importantly, on this same point, understand that admissions is about projecting who you are and evaluating your dream and plan. All right. So you're selling a vision of your future self. Obviously, your past accomplishments, your qualifications is a key part of your application. But so is the idea that you're telling the reader, like, here's what I want to become. And so make sure that you don't give short shrift to talking about the future. All right. Admissions is about projecting who you are and evaluating the dream and a plan. And so make sure that you're very clear about what you aspire to do, and make sure that it connects in a thoughtful way to what you're doing now and what you aspire to become. All right. The cheesy metaphor is it's like buying a stock. Your essay will tell your future, and the past is only relevant because past performance is a good indicator of future potential, right? That's what every stock commercial on television will tell you. And what this means is that as you write about what you are doing now, keep in mind what you are selling to the admissions committee about who you aspire to become. That should shape and inform the choices that you're making about your future and how you describe yourself and what you aspire to do and be. All right. So just keep all of these kind of points in your timeline in mind, so that you're making sure that past, present, and future all seem like a single person and not like a bunch of different people with various plans. Next. All right. One way to solve this is to actually do like a brainstorming exercise. And I know a lot of people don't love brainstorming. It can feel, I don't know, silly is not the right word, but you know, it can feel unserious, and in some sense, it's supposed to. Like, it's supposed to be like a low stakes version of writing. But I love brainstorming where you can sort of isolate yourself and you just write and write towards a question. So have a question like, who do I want business school to help me become? And you simply write about that. All right. And then you can come back and you can look at a specific prompt and then write about that. All right. And so you can then use this exercise to start making explicit connections between past, present, and future. So that, again, not to beat a dead horse, but so that when you go through this process of writing, at the end of the day, your essay looks like one person's past, present, and future all aligned. And I'm like, okay, I know where Jane is going with this. I understand her journey, her professional journey, who she hopes to become, how it's rooted in her experiences, informed by what she's doing now. That's the ideal version that you want to put out there. Next. All right. Third is don't run from your mistakes. Now, this is for many people the most important one. And if you want more on this, there I did a video earlier this year where I sort of talked for about a half an hour, 45 minutes specifically about this one. I'm not going to go into as much detail now, but I'm going to hit kind of the major points. Um, the first thing to understand is um, you have to find a balance between being thoughtful and honest with yourself about the strengths and weaknesses of your application, what it is that a school asks for in terms of grades, test scores, experiences, etc., and also not psyching yourself out so that you know, you take such a fussy or hypercritical view of your own application that you don't actually end up applying to places that you had maybe a chance to get into. So let me talk kind of basically about um, thoughts on failures and setbacks and how you can think about this within the context of personal statements and other admissions writing. The first thing is obviously that everyone will fail in their life. And it's true, especially successful people fail, right? There's something about if you haven't failed in your life, it means you're probably not trying hard enough or testing yourself. Um, and that if you're taking big cuts, you're taking big swings, you're going to miss sometimes. So that's okay. Start by kind of accepting and like, look, no person's journey to success is smooth and easy. All right. Second point that's related to that is that most people are really uncomfortable talking about their setbacks. And this is doubly true because most people view their applications as I have to put forth an absolutely perfect version of myself, flawless in every way, because that's the only reason that a school is ever going to accept me. That's not necessarily true. All right. Um, and if there are parts of your application that have some issues, it's certainly not the case that you want to just avoid them and hope that they don't notice. Because if you have issues, whether it's a poor grade or um, you know, test score issues or a gap in employment, these are things that will be seen, and so you want to make sure that you talk about it from your perspective and in your voice. Next. All right. So as noted, what am I talking about when I talk about kinds of failure? Poor grades. This could be either like overall or in a single class. Subpar test scores, gaps in your career. If you had academic discipline issues, plagiarism or whatever, professional failures, you were fired, demoted, a business failed. There's all sorts of ways that you can stumble in life. And so these are the things that I'm talking about. And if the admissions committee is going to know about them, they need to know about them starting from you. You need to be the one who explains and contextualizes them. And you can't just hope for a clerical error where they will overlook or somehow miss the fact that there are these blemishes on your record. So you do want to make sure that you address them head on and don't avoid them. Next. All right. So how does failure fit in the context of a personal statement then? Especially because the personal statement is designed to present a compelling version of you. All right. So how do you go about doing that? Next. All right. So as noted, there are a bunch of different times where you sort of have to put failure into an essay. Now, the first one is kind of the most obvious. There are some schools that will actually ask a question, tell about a time that you failed. Okay. Um, the way that I would think about that particular kind of essay is that um, the unwritten part of that prompt is, so it's tell us how you failed, is and how you recovered from it and learned from it. So if you have that prompt, what the essay certainly shouldn't be is you describing how you failed, and the essay ends with you and an abject failure, laying on your bed drinking whiskey because you're terrible. No, like the failure should be sort of towards the front of the essay or in the middle, so that you walk the reader through in a really clear sense of what happened. And then the second part of the essay is uh, moving the reader towards your understanding of recovering from that success and or that failure, and even moving towards success. So if you talk about a business that failed, for example, or you got fired from a job, um, you can have that as kind of the opening or third or half, and then from there you can say, like, these are the lessons that I learned from this in a really clear and explicit way. And then the last part of the essay will take the reader through um, the next thing that happened in your professional trajectory. Second point here, that I've touched on a little bit already, is that you need to talk about a failure in your application. If it's something that the admissions committee is going to see, it's better that you provide the explanation and context and the frame, because they will notice it. And if you don't explain it, they will just either insert their own, or they will say this is something that this applicant has not taken ownership of. They haven't truly internalized the error and thought about how to do better, or they lack self-awareness to understand that they should do it. And the thing to remember, especially for people who are applying to highly selective schools, is that we always talk about the admissions process, but to be honest, there's also a sense in which this is like a rejection process, where you have more applications than you have spots for. And a lot of times you have more applications of qualified candidates than you have slots for. And so what people are looking to do is to find reasons to eliminate you. All right. And if you give them an easy one, then they will take it. So if there's something wrong, you need to make sure that you uh, at least do your full college best to make sure that they don't use that as a reason to eliminate you. Third point here, we'll talk about this more in a second. There are ways that you can actually use failures and setbacks to your advantage, where if you properly deploy and explain it within an essay, it can show positive qualities like growth, potential, resilience, adaptability, optimism. Um, Come back to this in a second. But again, think about this as sort of what I said at the front, which is use as an opportunity to show, like, the failure didn't define you; it taught you something, and you move forward and you got better. And then lastly, as noted before, if you never try to do big things, you haven't pushed your horizons or explored your potential, um, you maybe haven't put out enough effort in life, and so you don't want to send out that feeling. Um, all right, next. All right. So the first thing to identify when you're thinking about whether something is like a big failure or a blemish, or rather, when you're thinking about setbacks, is to figure out whether it's a big failure or a blemish. A big failure, right, would be something like all of your undergraduate grades weren't very good. All right, you were just not a good student. You were expelled from your university. You had a startup that went bankrupt. Those are kind of big issues within your background that require a bit more work. A blemish is you're a pretty good student, but you failed one course. Solid overall application, but your test scores aren't maybe as high as you'd want them to be, right? So this sort of requires you to think honestly and holistically about your application and figure out just exactly how bad you think um, the blemish or the setback is. All right, next. If it's a blemish, what I would urge you to do is just like there's a straightforward 5-step method to take. And if, for example, you have like a full personal statement that's 1,000 words or something like that, or even a shorter one that's 500, 750 words, the second to last paragraph will basically be a paragraph where you um, sort of explain what happened, right? So a very common thing that will happen, for instance, is someone will have a death in the family or a family illness, or they got sick. They're great grades overall, but there was one term where they didn't. So um, I would begin by explaining the failure. First sentence is my sophomore year at university. I got a C- in economics, um, and it clearly falls outside of my overall pattern of excellence. All right. Don't use euphemisms or allusions where you say things like, you may notice in my application there are a couple of grades that weren't very high. Like, clearly identify. Say this term or this class, I had poor grades. All right. And if it's one class, identify the class. Own it and explain why it happened. You say, like, I accept responsibility for this. Um, but the context was uh, that my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I was going back and forth between college and home, and the stress of it distracted me more than it should have. Um, you then talk about, so you reassure the reader it won't happen again. You say, in the wake of that, I realized that in difficult moments, I need to either step away from work or find and use resources in order to help balance my time. And then, if possible, um, talk about what you learned from it, but also provide an example of subsequent success. So you say, later on when I experienced something difficult, um, I was able to, rely on academic advisors. I spoke to my professor. I took a more proactive approach, and I was able to manage these multiple stresses. And as you can see, my grades the rest of the way were excellent. All right. So again, the idea is you own it, you explain it, reassure the reader that it won't happen again, and why. And if there are examples, provide that example of subsequent success so that it's clear this was a one-off thing, exigent circumstances, etc. All right, that's how you deal with a blemish. A big failure. A good way to approach this is the old thing: if what you can't fix, feature. Um, and so what you do is you just sort of make it a key part of your story. All right, and this is the old metaphor that I use here is it's sort of like a bald man with a bad comb over, right? It just draws attention to the problem if you try to hide it, and it makes it worse and it's ultimately counterproductive. So, in the same way that I would tell someone whose hair is thinning, just cut your hair, it'll be all right. Own it, all right? Be that, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, he's bald. It works for him. Do that. Be that. Don't be the guy with the comb over. Same thing, accept and make it central to who you are if you have something that is a bad failure. All right, so I'm going to give you an example here. Next. All right. Um, how you think about this or how you feature something that's like a big failure is almost think of it like a movie. All right, where you start your story at the lowest point and you make the rest of the essay about your growth and your ultimate triumph. All right. And if you think about any movie, whether it's an action movie or a romantic comedy or whatever, you only care about the hero, the protagonist of the movie, if they face difficulty. Right. If there are things and kind of impossible odds that they have to overcome. And you can use that same approach when working through your essay. Say, okay, how do I make the reader understand that I faced this really terrible thing? And at first it looked like it was going to wipe me out, but I ended up succeeding. Next. So here's kind of an example taken from a real client, right? So he was worried that, like, I got fired from Google and I had a lot of other things about my application that were really strong, but is this going to kind of sink my application? And I said, no. So we talked about different approaches. And I said, if this is something you're really worried about, make it central to how you're pitching yourself, right? So you say, okay, the essay opens with him talking about how working at Google was his dream job. And the day that he was fired, he was completely devastated. And he thought that, like, um, kind of everything about what he had worked for um, had been destroyed in a moment. But after kind of this moment of devastation, he decided that he wasn't going to give up. He was going to persist. Um, and so he decided he was going to start his own company. Like, this was the thing that he needed, kind of the impetus, the nudge to say, okay, I'm going to do my own thing. If the last thing didn't work out, the next thing will. And uh, the essay then focused on, here's the lessons that I learned from why my time at Google didn't work. And then all of those lessons I then applied to my company, which is now starting to grow and it's experiencing success. And if I hadn't had this bad thing happen to me, I wouldn't have experienced that growth and I wouldn't be doing something I'm really excited about. All right. Now, the same thing can be true with grades, for example. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that you can have terrible grades and you can, use magic to get into Harvard or something like that. But I have had clients who had pretty subpar grades get into very, very good business schools, and it depends on them having subsequent success and experience that shows that who they were when they were 19, 20, 21 years old is not who they are now, and that their success subsequently shows that they are really smart and capable people. And again, in this this situation, how they approach that is they own it. They say, "Look, you know, um, I actually had a client who was expelled academically. Right, they got such poor grades they were kicked out their junior year." Um, and they basically kind of worked their way up within a tech company, demonstrated real skill, went back and got their undergraduate degree at a local school. And then they were, 10, 12 years into their career and they were thinking about going back and getting an MBA. And they were worried that this wouldn't, that their grades before, and they were published, they had patents, they had done all these amazing things. Um, and I said, like obviously the readers are going to know when they get your transcripts that you weren't a very good student 15 years ago. Go ahead and own that. Open your essay with it and talk about, you know, um, you set that as a mark of here's who I was 15 years ago. And as I've progressed through, I've done all these things. I kind of realized that the person that I was back then was a bit of an idiot and immature. But the thing that I needed at that point in my life was a kick in the backside. And this failure gave me that. And I'm now a better person. And they got into a lot of the top schools through that pitch, right? Because they didn't run away from um, their failures. They embraced it and they made it a central part of their application. Next. All right. Point four, don't just regurgitate your CV. Now, this builds on a lot of the stuff we've talked about to this point already. A lot of people assume that your personal statement or other admissions writing should just tell a story of your career from start to finish, right? And their personal statement will just read more like a list of accomplishments, um, and kind of detail what they did at each job, mention every single promotion, the titles they did. And that's not really what makes a compelling personal statement. Next. All right. A good essay, right, will focus on depth, not breadth. That is, take a couple of experiences and really explain them really well. All right. So we remember how we talked about, kind of past, present, future. That can a lot of times be a good way to approach an essay like this. You say, look, I'm going to talk about two or three things, and I'm going to do it a lot, and not try to talk about 10 things and just sprinkle a sentence or two for each. Tell fewer stories, but tell them well. Right. Again, go into greater depth on the things that you decide to talk about, and make sure that you begin your essay at an interesting place. You don't have to be really fussy with chronology. And what I mean by that is people feel like they have to start with, here's where I was when I started college and then my first job, second job, third job. You don't have to do that. You can play with chronology in a little bit. Start your essay at a place that you think is the most interesting, and then you can work through. Um, Next thing is to think in terms of decision points and pivots. What I mean is if you think about your life as a story, what are the key moments? All right. Those are the places that you want to dig into and explain a little bit more. And lastly, focus on what you did. Your actions should be the thing that tell the story. All right. By contrast, a weak essay will try to cram in every job. It feels more like a list than storytelling. And then, it's married to the idea that you have to proceed chronologically in the way that I just described. When I was a kid, I did this, and then university, and first job, second job, third job, and now here I am. Um, it shouldn't focus on being too comprehensive. There are parts of your life if you have a 2-page personal statement, which is kind of a normal length. Um, you can't fit everything in your life in 2 pages. All right, so just start the process, accepting that reality that there are things that have to be left out. Um, And so don't try to be comprehensive. Be really focused, and describing some pivot points and some important moments in your life. And then lastly, don't spend too much time describing the company or the job. Obviously, you want to know what it is that a company was or does, but a lot of times people will go into exhaustive detail talking about, like, here I was within the company hierarchy and I reported to this person, and my functions were these 9 things. No, just tell what you need to tell the story about what you did, and specifically, right, what the reader needs to know to understand what the challenge was that you faced and how you overcame it. Though that's way more important than um, giving the reader your job description from your manual. All right, next. All right, so if you're trying to figure out whether or not your personal statement is too much like a CV, some questions you can ask yourself is what's in my essay more substantive, interesting, and relevant than what's in my CV? And what I mean by that is, if I were to take your CV and I were to take your personal statement, um, does the essay seem more interesting and substantive? Is there more information in there? Do I get a greater sense of who you are and what you did than what the CV tells me? All right. If not, then you might want to add some flesh to it. Right. Um, Second, do I need to tell this story to demonstrate either the strength of my application or why I've chosen this path? All right. Some people feel, again, like they just have to stick everything in. And if it doesn't have a purpose, then keep it out. Right. And then lastly, are you the star of your essay? And what I mean by that is it clear that your actions and choices and the things that you are doing is what this essay is about? Or are you just sort of randomly hopping from kind of one moment to the next? All right, make sure that you're the one who's driving it, so that I understand, at this point you made this choice, at this point you made this choice, at this point you made this choice, and it's all part of a journey that makes sense. Next. Excuse me. All right, so here's kind of in a seminar that I did some time back. Excuse me. I had people sort of create initial drafts and then talk to them about how to fix them, and then they revise these drafts. All right. And yeah, the revised, stronger essay isn't perfect. There's still some things they can do, but it's much improved. All right. So here's an example, kind of some text from a weaker first version of the draft. I got my first job out of university at Samsung's quality control division. Samsung Quality Control tests all mobile products in order to make sure that they meet the exacting specifications of regulators in Japan, the United States, Korea, and the European Union. Quality Control was a subsidiary of the electronics division, reporting directly to headquarters in Seoul. I began as a tester, then worked in technical specifications, then moved laterally to manual and inputs for 4 years. My most important accomplishment came when I helped solve Galaxy 5's technical and regulatory sticking points. All right, so this is kind of an exhaustive, like, here's what I did. All right, but it's not very interesting and compelling, and it doesn't give a very strong sense of the kind of problems that they solved or the role that they played. Next. So here's a better version. All right. Apologize for all the text on the screen here. Given my technical background, after graduating from university, I worked mainly on projects dealing with technical glitches that were preventing the Galaxy 5 mobile phone from operating properly. I understood that the core problems were only partly technical. Our engineers were also struggling to understand and implement the requirements of Japanese, American, Korean, and European regulators. To solve this problem, I suggested to the head of electronics division that we create a working group A team to solve these challenges as they arose. She liked the idea and put me in charge of selecting its members. The A team fixed the technical glitches, got the Galaxy 5 rollout back on schedule, and met all regulatory guidelines. In recognition of the role I played, da 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 da, right? It's clear here what this person was actually doing, right? What they were doing is way more important and interesting than all the titles and kind of where they were in the scheme of the company. Here, I get a sense of their actions, the how they took the initiative, um, and it's a much clearer sense of who this candidate is and what their strengths are. Next. All right. Um, do the work. What I mean by this is can seem like a an obvious point, but it's maybe one of the most frequent mistakes that people make. And the reason is that, like, these applications, especially if you're doing a lot of them, it's hard work. All right. And frequently people want to shoehorn in experiences that they've written about in one essay just because they don't want to write a new one. Okay. Um, so I would urge you, right, um, to view every essay as kind of its own thing. This doesn't mean that you have to start from scratch every single time. But what you should at least do is think about it in terms of like creating a new outline for each essay. You can then go and cannibalize um, pieces from essays that you've already written. You can bring them over. That's fine. But don't start from the point of view of, okay, I've already written this essay that's kind of maybe a little bit about the same thing. Maybe I'll just kind of like cram it in here and make it work. No, right? Like if the prompt asks a question, make sure that you actually are answering that question head on and in a full way. All right. Um, Again, know that this can be an immense amount of work, especially for people who are applying to, like 10, 12, 15 or more schools. But the flip side is if you're going to go through this process for something that's going to determine the next several years of your life and have a real impact on your professional trajectory, take the time to build a new outline, to think about each essay prompt individually, and to actually go through the process of writing the essay for real and not just trying to like uh, grab the previous one and change a couple of words and jam it in there. All right, next. All right. I know I only said five, but here's a really quick bonus mistake. Don't write a brochure for the school. Okay, I'll explain what I mean um, a little bit more. Remember that this application ultimately is about you. It's not about the school. Yeah, the school is like involved. It's where you want to go, etc. But be really careful about which elements about the school you choose to highlight, and make sure that they demonstrate a theme that aligns with your application. And again, you should think about it less as a list that you're trying to make, and to think of it more in terms of storytelling, in the sense that a couple of things told well is better than a bunch of things. And frequently, um, it seems maybe even most essays that I write, they'll have that kind of paragraph right at the end where they say, okay, I want to go to Wharton, and here's the 9 clubs that I'm going to join, and these 12 activities I'm going to do. Well, it really just kind of looks like you went to the website and just grabbed every activity and every club and you just put it in there. And everybody knows that once you get to business school, you're not going to join 9 clubs and do these 12 activities. So you're actually much better to talk about a couple of them and to do it in a way that makes it seem like um, these are actually really important things to you, and that they align with other things that you've talked about in your essay. So, if you haven't in your essay talked about, doing education investing, it's really weird that you'll say, I want to join EdTech because I think EdTech is really cool in your essay. It sort of pops out of nowhere. And it doesn't make sense. All right. It really just does seem like you did a Google search, Wharton clubs, and there's a list, and you just dumped a bunch of them right at the end of your essay. So don't do that. Next. So here's kind of a weak approach and a stronger approach. All right. So I get essays that have a paragraph like this all the time. All right. And this is not what you want to do. So I'm excited about University X's use of case method to teach important business ideas. Additionally, given my passion for international business, I intend to join the Asia Business Club. I'm also interested in big data and artificial intelligence, so I'll join Data for Investing Club. I'm a passionate cook and foodie, so I also participate in University X's Wednesday restaurant tours and the monthly bar crawl. Lastly, after speaking with Andrea Sanders, I feel confident that participating in the Feldman Center's Case Competition and Leadership Academy would also sharpen my ability to handle complex client matters and prepare me for leadership within my firm. Right? This is just kind of a data dump. Like, here's a bunch of stuff that I got off the website and I want to do it. All right. Not the best approach. Next. So, what's the problem? First, it's generic in the sense that every business school, for the most part, uses some version of the case method. It's kind of what business school is. And so it's, unless there's some particular aspect of it, or there's something additional you want to explain about it, mentioning that doesn't really move the needle. There's no clear theme. It just feels like, here's a bunch of stuff that I read online. Um, you're probably not, and the reader knows you're not going to do all those activities and join all those clubs. And so, at the end of the day, this really just comes across as though you went to the website and dumped all this information into your essay, which isn't very helpful or useful to you. Next. All right. A better approach. After speaking with Andrea Sanders about her experience with the Big Data Club, I was especially excited to hear about the club's collaboration with Gold Star Marketing and creating more refined and effective targeting marketing for mid-sized retailers. My time at Samsung has made me a believer in the power of data to identify potential customers and engage them effectively. Thus, in my search for the right business school education, I've made a point to identify schools that feature both a robust curriculum in business analytics and extracurricular opportunities to deploy these skills and knowledge in the real world. And then you can actually provide maybe one or two opportunities that meet this. Okay, so this is a better approach. Next. And why? Again, it's specific. It goes into depth about why one club was precisely what the applicant needed. It builds on the theme from the essay. Makes it clear that what you're interested in and how the school and its extracurriculars fit within your educational and professional goals. Um, I'm more likely to actually believe you're going to join these associations because it makes sense. It's not just a list. Um, and lastly, it feels like the applicant has done some substantive research, thought about the school's strengths, and asked questions designed to develop a better application, all told. Next, or is that the last slide? Yep. Perfect. All right. So thank you for putting up with my super fast talking. If there are questions, um, now would be a good time to ask. All right. I'm not seeing any questions just yet. I'll give it another minute or two. Thank you. Thank you. Um, I'm glad this was helpful for you. Um, again, it looks like people don't have questions, or they. If you want to um, shoot me questions privately, um, feel free to. You can service at gurufi.com is how you can reach. Um, can we use quotes in an essay? You can. Um, the way that I think about this is that I usually encourage people not to, um, because for a couple of reasons. First, this is your chance to have an essay or to have the portion of the application that's in your voice. All right, this is you talking, and so um, like why would you have Abraham Lincoln doing your talking for you? Yeah, he can, great wordsmith, etc. But the other part is, all right, that if you read enough of these essays, you will see that people tend to use the same quotes over and over again. And it can be a little cliche. So if I had a nickel for every person who quoted from, Steve Jobs' commencement speech, I could retire. Um, the number of people who say, be the change that you hope to see in the world, right? That happens all the time. So, the challenge is that it's hard to come up with a quote that a lot of other people aren't using. Second, it takes the reader out of your voice and your perspective. Um, and so, it's not like it's something that you can't do or a red flag or anything like that. But if you feel inclined to use a quote, um, the thing that I would say is to first ask yourself what it is that you like about the quote and whether or not you can actually convey the same idea in your own words. Because if you do it in your own words, without plagiarizing, then it can be more effective. And most of the time, I think that um, people will feel an attachment to a quote because maybe they've encountered it in a moment in their life that it was really moving to them. But it tends to be a little bit more personal, in the sense that like it's important to them, but the reader doesn't feel moved in the same way. So that's just a convoluted way of saying you can do it, but I don't personally think it's the best way to approach a personal statement. That it's best to come from you if you can do that. All right. All right. Um, like I said, if any of you have questions, you can send questions to me via our website. It's gurufi.com, GURUFI.com. Or you can reach us at service@gurufi.com. Um, and I hope that you guys found this useful. And I wish you all the best of luck in your application process. And um, oh, is lack of extracurricular activities considered a gap in my profile that needs to be explained? Uh, it could be. So it sort of depends on um, it depends on quite a few things, right? One, where are you in your career, right? So, look, if you've been working for 10 years, and you have your extracurriculars in this sense is like your professional accomplishments, and so whether or not you joined clubs when you were a university student is largely irrelevant. It can be useful if they're germane and they tell part of the story. Um, if you're closer to graduating, the more things that you have that are non-academic, the more important that they are, right? But it's different than applying to colleges, for example, to undergraduate institutions where these are hugely important. It's So I guess that's my way of saying not really, right? Like, and it depends on what you consider an extracurricular. Like your professional successes are really important. Um, the things that you do outside of, they can tell more. They can add to the story. And certainly, it's how people pursue many of their passions. Um, so it's a bit hard to answer in the abstract. It's always better if you have more experiences, obviously, especially if they're germane and they tell part of the story of how you got to where you are. Um, but I think that you can construct a compelling application um, that is about what you're doing professionally and what you hope to do going forward. Rebecca asks, is 3 weeks enough for starting first draft on essays? Yeah, um, absolutely. So people write at different paces. I had a roommate who was a pretty good writer, and he was one of these annoying people who could sit down and then 3 hours later he would just have like a complete essay and you could turn it in and get an A. The way that I do it is, I firmly believe in kind of the measure twice, cut once sort of thing. So I make an outline, think about it, come back, fix it, and then I write. But 3 weeks should be more than enough. If you go through a process of, think about it in kind of like 4 stages. You do a thorough brainstorming, um, set it aside for a day, come back, go through the brainstorming that you've done, and kind of pull out the pieces that you think are relevant and germane. Um, then you create an outline, and then from that detailed outline that's built on the school, you then write out your essay. That can take you can do that in 4 or 5 days, and then a good tip would be to set it aside for a few days and then come back to it and do a final revision. And then if you're working, so if you then take that your version of a final draft and you bring that to us at Gurufi, in a pinch we can have it back to you in a day if you have a rush. But usually it's a 2 or 3 day process for getting it back. So 3 weeks should be more than enough to go from starting your first for your first essay to having that essay completed. Um, that's more than enough time. All right. Any other questions? All right. I see that GMAT Club, excuse me, has added a link where you can. Wow, my voice is giving out at just the right time. Um, where you can reach out to us if you have any questions. Please feel free to shoot us a message. And as I was saying before, I do genuinely, guys, wish you guys all the best of luck in your application process. I hope this was helpful to you, and I look forward to maybe seeing some of you guys come through our digital doors at GuruFi. All right. I guess that'll be it for today. enjoy your morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world.